or speaking to someone long gone. The sky might be green, time might reverse, nothing follows the rules, and yet it feels real. This is the dreaming mind, one of the most mysterious states the human brain can enter. Every night, without effort or instruction, your mind creates a theater of experience, sometimes abstract, sometimes emotional, sometimes so vivid that waking up feels like leaving something behind. But what exactly is a dream? Biologically, most dreams occur during REM sleep, a phase where the brain becomes active while the body stays still. Your eyes twitch beneath closed lids. Your heart rate fluctuates. Neurons fire almost as intensely as they do during waking life, but your muscles are paralyzed. You're locked inside. Still, this doesn't explain the experience of dreaming, the narrative, the imagery, the emotion. Where do these stories come from? Some scientists say dreams are just neural noise, the brain's way of sorting, cleaning, and filing memories, a kind of nightly defragmentation. Others argue that dreams serve a deeper role, simulating threats, solving problems, integrating emotion, a rehearsal space for life, built from fragments of memory and emotion. And then there's another view, that dreams are a mirror. They reflect what the conscious mind avoids: repressed fears, unprocessed feelings, unfinished thoughts. Carl Jung believed dreams revealed the shadow self, the parts of us we hide during the day. But not all dreams are random or symbolic. In lucid dreams, the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming, and sometimes even takes control, flying on purpose, visiting a place from memory, asking the dream itself questions. It's consciousness folded inward, an awareness inside an illusion, and aware that it's an illusion. Strangely, dreams can feel more true than waking life. You remember them not as thoughts, but as experiences. Emotions are amplified, logic is fluid, identities bend. You might dream of being yourself, but different, or not yourself at all. And yet, it still feels like you were there. This raises a deeper question. What is the self in a dream? If your body is sleeping and your memories are scrambled, but you still feel like someone, who exactly is that someone? And if the mind can simulate a world so convincingly while asleep, how can we be sure the waking mind isn't doing something similar? The dreaming mind is not just the sleeping mind, it's the creative mind unleashed, the emotional mind unfiltered, the conscious mind unbound by rules. So what is the dreaming mind? It's a system that doesn't just process reality, it invents it. A painter with no brush, a traveler with no map, a self that flickers and reforms with each passing scene. And yet, night after night, it builds a world from silence and leaves you wondering each morning which version of you was more real. Why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Before language, before logic, before waking thought took shape, the mind was already dreaming. Every species that dreams inherits a puzzle. Why invest in hallucinations during your most vulnerable hours? Why let the brain generate worlds that aren't even real? The answer may lie in the fact that the dreaming mind came first. Some scientists believe that dreaming isn't a side effect of sleep. It's the foundation that consciousness was built on. The dreaming brain came online long before humans walked the earth. Reptiles, birds, and mammals all show signs of dreamlike activity. That makes dreaming not just human, but ancient, deeply conserved, selected somehow, again and again. One reason? Dreaming may be the first form of mental simulation. Before animals could plan, they had to predict. Before they could think, they had to rehearse. Dreaming may have provided the original rehearsal engine, primitive but effective. Long before conscious strategy emerged, dreams may have given early brains the advantage of previewing possibilities. In this way, dreaming didn't evolve to be interpreted. It evolved to train the system without the risk of movement, a virtual landscape where instincts could be shaped by experience, not remembered experience, but internal, generative practice. Evolution's first internal prototype lab. There's also the question of neural development. In mammals, especially infants, dreaming occupies a massive portion of sleep. Human babies spend up to 50% of their sleep time in dream-rich states. Yet they don't have memories, no language, no structured learning. Why dream? One possibility is that dreams are used to scaffold the brain, to help build cognitive architecture before waking life fills it. Like scaffolding around a structure still under construction, dreaming may allow early neural systems to wire themselves up using internally generated signals. This might explain why dreaming remains prominent even in adulthood. Though less frequent, it continues, possibly to reinforce cognitive flexibility. In a world that keeps changing, the brain needs ways to restructure itself without starting from scratch. Dreaming may provide those nightly micro-adjustments, not to replay the day, but to reshape how the brain relates to the future. Another idea looks beyond individuals to evolutionary stability. Dreaming may have created a kind of behavioral buffer. By offloading certain mental processes into the night, like instinct rehearsal or emotional priming, daytime behavior could become more efficient, responsive, and stable. Over generations, organisms that could adapt internally while sleeping may have outperformed those that couldn't. So why did evolution give rise to dreaming? Because it gave early minds a place to run before they could walk, to model danger without entering it, to rehearse without risk, to wire themselves from within. Dreaming wasn't an accident of sleep. It was a leap into virtual space, and evolution chose to keep that leap alive. What is the role of language for the mind? Before language, there was sensation, the sound of water, the scent of danger, the pulse of hunger. Minds responded to the world, shaped by reflex, shaped by pattern, but they couldn't describe what they felt. They couldn't name it. They couldn't carry it forward. Then came language, and the mind changed forever. At first glance, language seems like a tool for communication. We use it to express wants, ask questions, tell stories. But its role goes far deeper. Language doesn't just let us share thoughts, it shapes them. The moment you name something, you divide it from everything else. A feeling becomes anger. A memory becomes childhood. A thought becomes true or false. Language gives form to the formless. It turns waves of experience into structured units the mind can hold, compare, and revisit. Without language, thoughts exist, but they float. Language ties them down. It lets the mind build chains of logic, layers of metaphor, structures of meaning. It allows you to stack ideas, nest them, break them apart, and build them again. Language is not just how the mind speaks, it's how the mind organizes. It also reshapes time. With language, you don't just remember the past, you narrate it. You don't just imagine the future, you script it. You tell yourself stories about who you were, who you are, who you might become, and those stories become identity. Some scientists believe inner speech, that voice in your head, is crucial for self-awareness. It's how the mind keeps track of itself. Without it, decisions become harder. Self-control fades, planning weakens. In this view, language is not just for talking to others, It's for talking to yourself. Language also allows for abstraction. You can think about justice, freedom, time, God, concepts that don't exist in the physical world. You can combine words that never met before: invisible cities, digital souls, broken clocks that still tell the truth. Each phrase builds a new mental space, a place that couldn't exist without names. But language also has limits. It simplifies, compresses, leaves things out. A word like love might mean something different to everyone who hears it. The more we name, the more we risk mistaking the label for the thing itself. Not everything the mind feels can be wrapped in syllables. Still, without language, the mind remains mostly private, vast, intuitive, but difficult to unpack. Language is what lets thoughts become shareable, repeatable, and recordable. It creates minds that can not only think, but think together. So what is the role of language for the mind? It is memory extended, identity shaped, thought structured, and imagination set free. Language didn't just give the mind a voice, it gave it scaffolding and turned raw experience into architecture. Did language create the voice in your head? You know the one, the narrator, the commentator, the voice that rehearses conversations, writes imaginary letters, narrates your choices as you make them. The one that sometimes won't shut up. But where did it come from? And was it always there? It feels like the voice in your head is the most private, essential part of being you. But some researchers suggest it might be one of the most recent, a product not of nature, but of language. Before we learn to speak, we still have minds. Babies react, they feel, remember, explore. But they don't think in words. Their thoughts are visual, emotional, sensory. Language is something layered on top of those early experiences. And as words begin to take shape, so does the voice that uses them. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky believed that language begins outside the mind, between people. A child hears others speak, then they start talking aloud to themselves. Gradually, that speech turns inward. It softens into silence. It becomes internal dialogue. The voice in the head is born from conversations that once needed sound. But it's more than just a whispering habit. Language gives the mind a new tool: narration. Once you can describe something, you can reflect on it. You can label your emotions, reframe your past, plan your future. The inner voice becomes a manager, organizing, editing, explaining. It helps maintain continuity. It reminds you who you are, and yet it also creates friction. That voice can loop, judge, rehearse worst-case scenarios. It can talk over experience. It can drown out silence. For many, it becomes not just a narrator, but a noise they can't control. Interestingly, not everyone experiences the inner voice the same way. Some people report mostly images, shapes, impulses. Others say they hear multiple voices, each with its own tone, opinion, or agenda. The inner monologue is not as universal as we assume. It's shaped by culture, development, and personality. And what about non-linguistic minds? Do animals have an inner voice? Probably not in the way we do. They think, react, solve problems. But without language, there's no running commentary, no constructed self in narrative form. There may be awareness, but no script. So did language create the voice in your head? Not entirely, but it gave it vocabulary, structure, a place to live. Language turns scattered thoughts into sentences. It turned the mind into a room where one part of you can speak and another part can listen. It's not the only way to think, but it's one of the loudest. And maybe that's why so many spiritual traditions emphasize quieting the inner voice, not to silence the mind, but to remember that before language, the mind still was, and beneath all the words, it still is. What is psychology? We often think of psychology as a field of therapy sessions, personality types, or diagnostic labels, emotions on a chart, disorders in a manual. But that's just the surface. Psychology is something deeper. It's the study of the human mind, not through philosophy or poetry, but through observation, measurement, patterns. It asks, what do people do? Why do they do it? And what, underneath it all, is the mind really up to? But this wasn't always possible. For most of history, the mind was considered invisible. You couldn't touch it, weigh it, or observe it directly. It belonged to religion, to introspection, to mystery. But in the late 19th century, something shifted. People began asking, what if we could study the mind like a natural system? What if thoughts, emotions, and behavior followed laws we could uncover? The birth of psychology came not with answers, but with a decision to bring the mind into the realm of science. And that decision split the field. Some psychologists focused on behavior, the external, things you could observe and measure. They studied reaction times, learning curves, reflexes. If it couldn't be seen or tested, it didn't count. This became behaviorism, an attempt to make psychology as rigorous as physics. Others looked inward. They believed the mind couldn't be understood without the inner world. Attention, memory, desire, pain. These psychologists studied introspection, dreams, emotional recall. It was messier, but it felt closer to experience. Today, psychology stands between those poles. It studies not just how people act, but how they think, feel, and decide. It maps attention. It models emotion. It analyzes motivation. It searches for the patterns behind irrational behavior, why we procrastinate, why we lash out, why we fall in love. But deeper still, psychology is trying to understand one thing. What drives the human animal? What keeps us moving? What derails us? What makes us repeat, avoid, sabotage, change? Psychology isn't about labeling minds. It's about uncovering the logic inside the chaos. It tells us that thought isn't always rational, that emotion isn't the opposite of logic. It's often the foundation of it. That memory lies. That perception is biased. That two people can walk through the same room and live two completely different experiences. And in doing this, psychology offers more than insight. It offers empathy. It shows that behind every action, no matter how strange, sudden, or self-defeating, there is a mind trying to make sense of its world. So what is psychology? It's not just the study of behavior. It's the science of what it feels like to be human, and why that feeling sometimes misfires. It's not a cure for the mind, but it is a mirror held up to it. One that asks quietly, continuously, not just what are you doing, but why are you doing it that way? What is behavior? We often think of behavior as action, movement, the things people do. Someone laughs, hesitates, lashes out, walks away, and we say, that's behavior. But behavior isn't just motion. It's meaningful motion. It's the mind turned outward, expressing itself not in thoughts or feelings, but in decisions, in rhythms, in visible, measurable patterns. You don't always know what someone is thinking, but you can see what they do. And that's why behavior became psychology's first language. It's observable, trackable, a living print of how the mind is adapting to the world. At its core, behavior is a response to conditions, not always conscious, not always rational, but always shaped by some internal logic. The brain doesn't wait for perfect information. It reads the moment, and the body moves. Scratch an itch, blink, check your phone, fidget while waiting. These aren't mistakes. They're small-scale strategies. Tiny calibrations between your internal state and your environment. The body adjusting itself without needing to ask permission. And some behaviors stretch far beyond the moment. Habits, routines, avoidance patterns, reactions that replay long after the original cause is gone. The mind learns from past outcomes and builds behavioral shortcuts. Sometimes those shortcuts work, sometimes they don't. But the behavior stays because it's familiar, because it's served once. Behavior also encodes emotion. You can't always say what you feel, but your posture can, your pace, the way you enter a room. Emotion lives in movement. It doesn't hide inside you. It leaks into gestures, tone, micro-expressions. That's why you can sense tension before a word is spoken. And behavior isn't always reactive. It can be predictive. You prepare, position, posture yourself based on what might happen. That's why someone steps back before being pushed. Why we glance toward exits before a conversation ends. Behavior constantly anticipates. Even stillness can be behavior. A held breath, a clenched jaw, silence in a moment that demands a reply. The absence of action isn't emptiness. It's a message, a choice, a signal sent without sound. And here's the twist. Not all behavior is your own. Much of what we do is coordinated, mimicked, mirrored, shaped by social feedback. We pick up mannerisms, tone, posture, phrasing, not consciously, but automatically. We sync, we match, we blend. Because fitting in was once a matter of survival. So what is behavior really? It's not just what you do, it's how your mind navigates the world through action. It's memory, mood, instinct, and anticipation, expressed as movement. Not a symptom, not a mistake, but a language. One the body speaks fluently, even when the mind stays silent. Can the mind be simulated? It's one of the most haunting questions of our time. If a mind is just a system made of parts, patterns, processes, then in theory, it should be copyable. A mind made of silicon instead of cells. A digital consciousness. A machine that doesn't just act like us, but feels like us. But is that really possible? To simulate a mind, we'd need more than surface behavior. Not just a machine that can play chess or answer questions. We'd need a system that can feel joy, imagine futures, dread loss, reflect on its own thinking. We'd need to recreate consciousness, the spark, not just the wiring. Some scientists believe this is a matter of complexity. If we can model every neuron in the human brain, roughly 86 billion of them, and their trillions of connections, we might capture the essence of mind. This is the idea behind whole brain emulation. Scan the brain, map the structure, rebuild it in code. In this view, the brain isn't magical, it's mechanical. And if thought is what the brain does, then a simulated brain could think too. But there's a problem. A perfect simulation of water doesn't get anything wet. A perfect simulation of fire doesn't produce heat. So if we simulate a brain, does it actually feel? Or is it just acting like it does? That's the mystery at the heart of this question. Is the mind about function or about feel? Functionalists say, if it behaves like a mind, it is a mind. If it reacts, reflects, feels pain when injured, joy when rewarded, then that's enough. Whether it's neurons or microchips doesn't matter. The software is the self. But others argue that consciousness depends on biology, that there's something about the wet, organic, living nature of the brain that can't be replicated in metal and code. You might recreate the behavior, but never the awareness. And even if we could simulate a mind, whose mind would it be? Would we copy an individual, memories and all, or build something entirely new? Would it start as a blank slate, or wake up with a self? Could it suffer? Could it grow? Could it want anything at all? And then there's the ethical question. If a simulated mind can suffer, are we responsible for it? Can we switch it off? So, can the mind be simulated? Maybe. Technologically, we're getting closer. The models are growing more sophisticated. The lines between biological and artificial thought are starting to blur. But philosophically, we may still be in the dark. Because even if we succeed, we might not know if the light inside that simulation is real. And until then, the mystery of the mind remains. Not just how to understand it, but how to recreate the thing that asks the question in the first place. What is average general intelligence? We often treat intelligence like a number, a score, something you can plot on a graph and circle in red ink. But what we call general intelligence, or G, isn't a single skill. It's a pattern, a current that runs underneath problem solving, memory, reasoning, and adaptation. It's not what you know, it's how you learn. General intelligence is the ability to deal with complexity, to recognize patterns, to apply past knowledge to new situations, and to do all of that across different kinds of tasks: math, language, spatial reasoning, social situations. The term G emerged from the work of Charles Spearman in the early 1900s. He noticed something strange. Students who did well in one area, say vocabulary, tended to do well in others, like math or memory. This suggested a shared cognitive engine running beneath all mental tasks. That engine is what we now call general intelligence. But what about average intelligence? Psychologists typically set the average IQ score at 100. It's not a cosmic truth. It's a statistical choice. On a bell curve, most people cluster around the middle. That's what average means here. Not typical experience, not potential, but placement relative to others in specific cognitive tasks. But intelligence is slippery. It doesn't unfold the same way in everyone. Some minds solve puzzles without words. Some remember everything but struggle to plan. Some are brilliant in abstract ideas but miss emotional cues. That's why average is such a tricky word. It doesn't mean normal. It doesn't mean limited. It just means somewhere in the middle of a very complicated distribution. And even G doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't measure creativity, or kindness, or curiosity. It doesn't capture the kind of intelligence it takes to de-escalate a tense room, or sense what's left unsaid in a conversation. It doesn't track how fast someone learns when they actually care about the subject. And yet, general intelligence still matters. It predicts how well someone might navigate unfamiliar problems, how quickly they adapt to changing rules. It's a kind of cognitive flexibility, an ability to shift, reframe, and find structure in the unknown. But there's something humbling about average intelligence, because even at the middle of the curve, the human mind remains extraordinary. It can imagine futures, build tools, compose music, reflect on its own reflection. It's not the number that's impressive. It's the fact that even so-called average minds contain language, memory, vision, desire, fear, and the ability to wonder where it all comes from. So what is average general intelligence? It's not a ceiling, not a label, not a limit. It's a statistical midpoint in a species capable of symphonies and spacecraft. And maybe what matters more than where your mind lands on a chart is what it chooses to build with the space it's been given. What have the greatest minds said about the mind? For thousands of years, some of the most curious, brilliant, and restless minds have turned inward, not to find answers, but to better ask the question, what is this thing that thinks? Socrates once said, "Know thyself," not as a slogan, but as a mission. He believed that the unexamined mind, the one that never questions, never reflects, isn't truly living. For him, to understand the mind was to begin understanding what it means to be human. Descartes, centuries later, doubted everything: the senses, the body, even the stars, until he arrived at one undeniable fact: I think, therefore I am. To him, the very act of thinking was proof of existence. The mind was not just a product of being, it was the foundation of it. David Hume had a different take. He looked into himself and found no core, no center, only fleeting sensations and thoughts. He wrote, "I never can catch myself at any time without a perception." For him, the self wasn't a thing. It was a stream, always changing. Buddha went further. He taught that the mind clings to identity out of fear, that what we call a self is just a bundle of processes. He described the mind not as a fixed object, but as a flame, flickering moment to moment. William James, the father of modern psychology, called consciousness a stream, too. Not a single thing, but a flow, continuous, changing, ungraspable. He said the mind wasn't a thing to be captured, but a field to be explored. Carl Jung believed the mind was deeper than we realize, that beneath our individual thoughts lies a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of memory and symbol passed through generations. He said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Alan Turing, who helped invent the modern computer, asked if a machine could think, and in doing so, forced us to ask what we mean by thinking. He blurred the line between artificial and human minds, not with answers, but with a question we're still living with today. Patricia Churchland, a modern philosopher, reminds us that the brain is not a ghost box. She writes, "The mind is what the brain does, and yet, even in this clarity, mystery remains." Each of these minds disagreed with the others. Each saw from a different angle, but they all touched something invisible, something you can't point to, but feel every day. So what have the greatest minds said about the mind? That it is a stream, a flame, a mirror, a mystery. That it is not just what you have, but what you are, and what quietly you are always becoming. Does universe only exist because of mind? We assume the universe is out there, solid, silent, indifferent. Galaxies spin, stars collapse, time flows forward. But at some point, one small corner of it became aware. A mind opened, and in that opening, the question formed. What is all of this? And more unsettling still, would any of it exist without a mind to ask? Physics doesn't flinch at this question. In fact, it quietly invites it. The anthropic principle says the universe appears the way it does because we're here to observe it. Not that it was made for us, but that it had to be this way for us to even ask. Out of all possible combinations of physical laws, we live in one that allows minds to emerge. Coincidence or necessity? Then there's quantum theory, where particles don't seem to settle into definite states until they're observed, until measured, until witnessed. It's as if reality holds its breath, waiting to be noticed. Some physicists say this is just math. Others say it might be telling us something deeper. Could it be that observation is not a byproduct of the universe, but one of its pillars? Philosophers like George Berkeley believed the world only exists because it's perceived. He wrote, "To be is to be perceived." Without a mind, a tree falling in a forest doesn't just make no sound. It might not even be there in any meaningful way. More recently, thinkers like John Wheeler proposed the idea of a participatory universe. That reality isn't a static stage, but an unfolding script, written only as it's read. In his words, the universe does not exist out there, independent of us. Of course, this doesn't mean the stars vanish when you blink, or that the moon disappears when you sleep, but it raises a possibility that mind and cosmos are not separate but entangled. That what we call the universe is only half the equation. The other half is awareness. And here's the twist. If no mind had ever appeared, would we even be asking if the universe exists? So, does the universe only exist because of mind? Maybe not in substance. Maybe the atoms, the fields, the dark matter all persist regardless. But the experience of a universe, a sky, a moment, a question, requires a witness, a consciousness, a mind. Without that, the cosmos might still spin. But there would be no one to know it had ever spun at all. And in that sense, the universe may not need minds to be real, but it might need them to be meaningful. Will we ever understand the mind completely? We've mapped its anatomy, named its lobes, tracked its pulses, watched neurons light up like constellations. We've built theories, models, machines. We've broken it into parts: emotion, memory, attention, self, and yet it slips. The more closely we look, the more the mind seems to blur under the microscope. Like a dream you can't quite remember. Like a voice fading just as you begin to listen. Why? Maybe because the mind is not just the object of study, but the tool doing the studying. A mirror trying to reflect itself. A flame trying to see its own fire. Every insight is filtered through the very thing it's trying to reveal. Some scientists believe we're close, that once we model enough neurons, once we decode the full complexity of the brain, the mystery will collapse into understanding. Others disagree. They say there's something about experience, subjective, first person, raw, that no scan can ever capture. Philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" Not in behavior or biology, but in experience. The bat's sonar, its spatial sense, its pulse of the world. That question still echoes, because even if we explain how the mind works, do we ever fully know what it feels like to be someone or something else? There's also the question of limits, not of knowledge, but of cognition itself. Maybe the mind was designed to survive, not to understand itself. A flashlight can't light up the bulb inside itself. It was never meant to. But maybe that's not a failure. Maybe the mind isn't something to be solved like a puzzle, but listened to like a song. Understood not in full, but in rhythm, in mood, in motion. Because the very act of wondering, of searching, reflecting, asking, is already part of what it means to have a mind. To chase questions you know may never settle, to explore the landscape of thought, even if the map is always shifting. So will we ever understand the mind completely? Maybe not. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe the beauty of the mind isn't in its clarity, but in its depth, in the way it can ask, feel, imagine, dream. And maybe the deepest understanding of the mind is the quiet awe of realizing you're inside one. What will future minds be like? The mind you're using to hear these words is a product of deep time. Millions of years shaped its circuits. Stone tools, firelight, language, memory. Evolution didn't design it to understand particle physics or code or galaxies. It designed it to survive, to bond, to wonder. But now, something is shifting. For the first time in history, a mind has begun to redesign itself. With machines, with chemicals, with wires and code and questions no other species has ever asked. So what comes next? Some say the future mind will be faster, memory that never fades, thought speed untethered from biology, access to libraries of information, not learned but streamed, a kind of synthetic intuition, knowledge not earned by study but downloaded in seconds. Others imagine the mind becoming more interconnected, not individual but shared. Collective minds, linked by neural interfaces, networked consciousness. What one person feels, another could feel instantly. Empathy not as an effort, but as architecture. Or maybe the future mind won't be human at all. Maybe it will be built in silicon, trained by data, awake, but not like us. Minds that don't tire, don't sleep, don't dream, unless we teach them how. Minds that don't carry fear or joy or identity in the way we do, but still, somehow think. And what happens to us then? Some believe we'll merge with them, augment ourselves, blend biology with machine, keep our sense of self but stretch it. Others think we'll split, that artificial minds will evolve on their own path, and we'll watch, unsure if we've given birth to a mirror, or to something else entirely. But not all future minds will be technological. Some will be inward, meditative, minimalist, intentional. Minds that train themselves not to multitask faster, but to slow down, to see clearly, to suffer less. The future mind may be not just augmented, but awakened. And maybe it won't be either or. Maybe the future will hold multitudes, digital minds in orbit, quiet minds in forests, minds exploring the far edge of intelligence while others return to something ancient, simpler, still. Because a mind is not just a tool. It's not just memory or speed or language. It's a way of relating to reality. And in the future, that relationship may look very different, but it will still be asking the same quiet question. What am I? Where am I going? And what else could I become? So what will future minds be like? Faster maybe, stranger certainly, but also still searching. And maybe that's what will never change. What does the mind reveal about ultimate reality? Throughout history, we have tried to use the mind to understand the world around us. We developed language, science, mathematics, and philosophy. We created systems to measure, predict, and model reality. But every system we build is limited by the structure of the mind itself. The mind interprets. It simplifies complexity into usable patterns. It compresses information. It highlights what matters for survival and filters out what doesn't. It does not record reality directly. It builds a manageable version of it. From this, one fact becomes clear. The mind does not experience reality as it truly is. It experiences reality as it can be processed. Sensory limitations, cognitive biases, emotional weighting. All these influence what we perceive and how we understand it. The mind is not a transparent window onto the universe. It is an active processor. What we call the world is already heavily reconstructed before we are even aware of it. This does not mean ultimate reality does not exist. It likely does. But the version of it we interact with is shaped at every level by the mind's operating constraints. Color, sound, time, selfhood, all emerge from how biological systems interact with external inputs. In physics, models like quantum theory challenge the idea that an objective world sits unchanged behind observation. At subatomic levels, phenomena seem defined partly by measurement itself. This suggests that observation, the act of mind noticing, may participate in forming what we call reality. However, participation is not creation. Ultimate reality is not an invention of mind. It is the underlying structure that the mind attempts, imperfectly, to model. Thus, the mind reveals several key things about ultimate reality. First, reality is not directly accessible without distortion. Second, any model we build of it is provisional, limited by cognitive architecture. Third, while complete understanding may be impossible, partial, functional understanding is possible and has allowed us to survive, evolve, and build civilizations. In the end, the mind does not reveal what ultimate reality is in itself. It reveals what reality appears to be when processed through a particular type of evolved cognitive system. And recognizing this limitation is not a defeat. It is the beginning of using the mind more carefully, aware of both its power and its boundaries. Ultimate reality likely exists independent of our thoughts about it, but every thought we have about it passes through the filter of mind. Understanding that filter is as close as we may ever get.